So my name is Dr. Carl Marcy. I'm the Chief Neuroscientist for Nielsen Consumer Neuroscience, and I'm at the ARF today talking about a really groundbreaking study where we combined in-market sales from single source data from Nielsen Catalina across 60 consumer packaged goods ads, and then looked at the ability of different neuroscience measures, including facial coding, biometrics, and EEG, to predict those outcomes. And so we're thrilled to be here.
So what brought about this study? Why do this at this time?
Yeah, it's a good question. So Leslie Wood and I were together in Las Vegas at CBS Television City, and she said they were really excited because they had figured with their data that they were pretty close to a pure measure of the creative, meaning they could control for the targeting, for the media weight, the timing of the advertising, and really isolate just the impact of the creative itself without those other variables on sales. And I said, wow, that's fantastic. We think we have a great measure of creative. What if we put the two together? And then Dave Polchak from CBS said, I'd be very interested in that, and provided the funding. So it was really a great meeting in the minds and somewhat serendipitous.
Can we get into a little bit of the details of the components of creative that you feel you can measure through neuroscience?
Sure. If you think about traditional copy testing using surveys, typically online, there are sort of three dimensions. Do you remember it? Do you like it? Would you buy it? If you think about the neuroscience measures, there's three non-conscious dimensions: attention, emotion, and memory. And so what the tools that we've put together in this study allow us to do is to measure, without asking any questions, passively as viewers experience the ad, each of those dimensions second by second. And then we can put those metrics that we can derive from that into a statistical model and see if they relate to sales.
Are you able to tell me which neuroscience techniques you use to measure each of those three?
Sure, yep. So let's start with EEG. That's the most complex. Electroencephalography. We're using 32 sensors coming off of the brains of consumers. And from those sensors, we can derive each of those three measures: a measure of attentional processing, emotional motivation, and then memory activation. And then with the biometrics, we can get to another dimension of emotion, which is sort of the emotional intensity. And then with the facial coding, we can get at a third dimension of emotion, which is, does someone like it? Do they smile? Do they frown? Or do they look surprised? And really, if you think about emotion in all its complexity, we're able to capture three of the most important components. How much energy is in it? Is this something I want to approach or avoid? Or is something I like, I dislike?
So when it comes to facial expressions, can you parse out the time that somebody might have a very negative expression but could therefore be incredibly engaged?
It's a good question. So we don't think, and in fact this study somewhat supports the fact that a negative response is a bad thing. If you think about it, sometimes if you're selling headache medicine, you might show people who are suffering from headaches, and people may have a concerned look on their face, and that can register negative, but it means they're very much engaged. So one of the things we're finding is that indifference is what kills advertising. And so really getting any emotional response is better than no emotional response.
So any emotional response is better than no response?
In general, that's a suggestion from this data, yes. In other words, a negative expressed emotion did not have a negative impact on sales.
So now that you've captured all of the neuroscientific responses, how did you then connect it to sales?
So this is where a whole lot of statistical processing comes in. We actually had three separate teams, one in Boston, one in Berkeley, California, and another in New York, look at the data independently. We ran a number of different statistical models, and then what I presented today was actually a range of results. So rather than just sort of picking one model, we actually presented a range of the responses, which were fairly consistent, which is that the facial coding was between 9 and 12% of the variance, meaning the portion of the pie it could explain. The biometrics were between 22 and 29% of the variance, and then the EEG was between 57 and 62%, I believe. So EEG was really driving the bulk of the work, but I think the most important finding is that when you combine all of them, they don't overlap as much as you might think. And so they really are measuring different things, and so we found that a sum of the parts was greater than any individual part.
Can you talk about the correlation between certain responses and sales?
Yep. So as I was indicating with the variances, which is an R squared, which is the squaring of the correlation, we found very high measures. So around 10% for facial coding, around 30% for biometrics, and around 60% for EEG. Combined, it goes up to 77%. So that's where that whole is greater than the sum of the parts, or any individual part. And we feel that also gives us powerful explanatory abilities when we're looking at the moment by moment or second by second ad creative.
Is there variance by demographic or psychographic profile of the respondent?
Do you want me to answer?
Sure.
Yeah.
Did you find any variance between, age or gender breaks or income or other kinds of market breaks from the data?
So it's a great question. What we did is we recruited consumers who were category users and non-avoiders. So we didn't actually parse the data in any subsegments. As you may know, with the neuroscience measures, we have relatively small cell sizes. So that would have dramatically increased the scope of the work. So we blended the recruits and did not separate by gender or demographic or otherwise. But we did select people who are real targets for the advertising.
So is there a variance by sales category? Is there a variance by creative genre?
So we didn't look by creative genre, but we ended up having to control for the market share and the price of the product. So we didn't look at that as a variable, but mostly we had very big brands, you would have heard of all of them, that have good market share. So these weren't small niche players, these were major advertisers across multiple categories, including adult beverages, soft drinks, health and beauty. We even had confectionery in there and baby products. So really a diverse set of products.
As a result of the study, do you feel now you can develop certain norms or precepts, or does it require more research?
So I think this study greatly advances our existing knowledge base and normative database. However, we feel that we are always learning. So we're always refining and always fine-tuning. So we have norms and benchmarks that we use today, but this is complicated stuff, and we expect over time we'll continue to tweak and evolve those measures.
Is there some thought to eventually, based on what you found out here, to roll it out in a larger form, perhaps a syndicated study of some sort?
So I think we're probably a few years away from syndicating neuroscience measures. We have to recruit a particular group of people, and there's a lot of skill and precision that goes into doing the work. That said, we do have 15 brick and mortar labs around the world, and we're excited to be able to offer this tool on a global basis. So over time, we'll continue to evolve and get better and faster.
Do you find that from what you've learned that you could actually help mold the creative and go back to the creatives and say, if you do this a little differently, you'll have a much better result?
So that's a really great question, and it's key to what we offer our clients. So not only do we give them metrics in terms of which ads are performing better or less well, but we give it a diagnostic evaluation, second by second of the ad. And I think what this study helps us do is understand how to value each of the technologies, even at that second by second level. So yes, we do, and I expect we'll be doing more and more.
What are some next steps?
Well, we're very excited to be rolling all these technologies out in a new product that we're calling Video Ad Explorer. So clients will be able to get the combination of these tools with our knowledge and our databases and benchmarks so that they can go from making good advertising to great advertising. And we're excited to do that.
Give me a very quick overview of the study and what you were aiming to achieve.
So, a year ago, Carl, Interscope was acquired by Nielsen, and I met him at C360 and said, Carl, we've got to work together. And I realized that we had pulled together a lot of the work NCS had just done was really getting to what was a commercial piece. How did the creative actually do? And so we collaborated over the next several months and came up with this study. So we've looked at 60 commercials, and the key part for NCS is we actually believe we're measuring the effectiveness of creative. So purchase-driven planning work separates in an ROI. We can separate the value of the creative from the value of the media. And by separating them, all of a sudden you can diagnose what works, what doesn't work. If I change my media plan, how does my ROI change? And if I change my creative, how does my ROI change? So it's very simple math. It's available for anybody, and this purchase-driven work really sort of illustrates that. But that purchase-driven work is supported by, could only have been done if we'd had cognitive advantage. So cognitive advantage is this machine learning algorithm we have that instead of the unit of measure being a household, the unit of measure is a purchase occasion. So being a purchase occasion gives us so much more granularity. It also gives us a sense of where in the pipe or the funnel a person is. So there's an element of time in a purchase occasion. It's not a household across any period of time. So cognitive advantage takes care of purchase occasion. It takes care of targeting bias. Yesterday they were talking about endogeneity, and that's what that means. Is if all your impressions were delivered to people who were heavy buyers, you're going to have heavier buying among those that are exposed. So how do you control for that and that targeting bias? And cognitive advantage does a very good job there. It also has a sort of controversial aspect to it. It only provides one answer. So you get one single result, no researcher involvement, and you have to live with that one result. But that one result gives us, for neuroscience, a fabulous, very variable measure. It's clean. And it's a very good way for them to diagnose and validate and figure out how to use the neuromeasures to understand creative. So it's been a perfect storm, and I think a great project.
So what is cognitive advantage?
So cognitive advantage, and we call it CA. So CA is a measurement tool. It tells you the in-market sales, incremental sales that advertising drives. And because it's so sophisticated, it's machine learning, it has super learners, it's a very intense mechanism. We can actually look at the incremental sales by household, by purchase occasion, and take apart what are the influences and what's happening. So it's a tool that's given us the ability to do the purchase-driven planning work, and together those provided the insights to be able to do the neuro work.
Can you talk a little bit about the type of neuroscience that was used?
Okay, so I'm not the neuroscience expert. The measures, I think Carl would give you the measures that were used. They were EEGs and biometrics. He used facial coding, and I know they also did eye tracking, and they're working on self-report. But that's not my
So Carl's work added the neuroscience. Talk about your side of this project.
So we measured each piece of creative. How did it drive sales? And we looked at our 13-cell grid, where we've got the horizontal measures are light, medium, and heavy category buyers, and on the vertical, it's are you a brand buyer, and how loyal are you? So you look at those cells, and within each cell, you can understand how much, what were the incremental sales for every purchase occasion, and that's a measure of creative. Now, what we see is that depending on who responds most, you'll see different. You can see responses that are 10 or 20 times as high in some segments as another. Because we wanted to remove the impact of the media from that, we then weighted each piece based on the number of households there were in the country in each of those segments, so that we'd accurately predict what, if you were to deliver that commercial, a single impression to every household in the country, what would your neuroscience, what would your creative have delivered? Because it could be so different if all your impressions went to loyals or non-loyals. And we wanted a measure that neuro could predict. They wouldn't know who got the impressions.